everyone for being here. It's amazing to see such a fantastic turnout. My name is Sarah Berry, and I'm one of the facilitators this evening. So first of all, we're not going to do a lot of talking this evening. We want you to do a lot of talking, so there's some short speakers or short presentations. This is meant to be cafe style, but we had a great turnout, so it's turned into a bit of an auditorium in here. But first of all, what is a Cafe Scientifique? Cafe Scientifique were started by the Canadian Institutes for Health Research to democratize science, so to bring science out of the ivory towers, to talk about science, to have opportunities to ask questions. So no previous scientific knowledge is required for this evening. You can ask whatever you would like. You can simply sit back and enjoy the dialogue, but it's meant to be informal. So how is this going to work? First of all, we're going to have a panel of 3 speakers that are going to present for about 5 to 7 minutes. So I'm going to introduce you to them in a moment. After that, we're going to have a short break, just so that you know, if you haven't already found out, there's a free vegetarian meal for everybody and free non-alcoholic beverages. So you can go to the counter and get some food at that break, come back, talk amongst yourselves. And then we have 2 additional discussants, after which the floor will be open. So the idea is that we just have an open discussion amongst ourselves. I'm going to introduce you to our panel of 3 speakers, so experts on the various themes from tonight, so mental illness, media, and stigma. The first speaker will be Dr. Rob Whitley, who is an assistant professor in psychiatry at McGill University. He has considerable experience in the area of recovery and is also currently the director of a Mental Health Commission of Canada funded study on media, mental illness, and stigma.
So I'm going to spend this brief 5 or 10 minutes just talking about a research study that I've been doing here in Montreal, which is funded very kindly by the Mental Health Commission of Canada here, Mike Petrus is representative. And the aim of this study is to see how Canadian media portray mental illness. And we're doing this in a very systematic way. So we have a software which we use which can retrieve every single article about mental illness in Canadian newspapers from 2005 to the present, and we're going on to 2012. So we put in search terms like mental illness, mental health, schizophrenia, schizophrenic into this software, and this software gives us all the articles from major Canadian newspapers. So this is the Montreal Gazette, the Vancouver Sun, the Toronto Sun, the Ottawa Citizen. We have a list of about 30 newspapers, and we get monthly. We separate them by month, and we get about 200, 300 a month, which mention mental health and mental illness. And so we've got about 9,000 altogether from 2005 to the present, and that's why the research team have been doing an amazing job coding them. What we do when we get these articles is that the research team reads these articles and then gives it a series of codes. They answer a series of questions for each article. So one question, is this stigmatizing or not? Does it mention effective treatments? Does it mention crime and violence in the context of mental illness? And what I wanted to do today was just give you a brief overview of some of the key results from what we found. And I must say this is provisional. We haven't done a precise statistical analysis as yet. That's forthcoming. But we've done a fairly comprehensive preliminary analysis. So I feel confident that what I tell you today, if it doesn't reflect the accurate, absolute truth, is quite close to that reality. So what did we find? Well, out of that 9,000 articles that we retrieved and we coded and we looked at, we found one of the key findings was there's a lack of voice for people with mental illness in these articles. Over 80, almost 90% of these articles never cite somebody with a mental illness in the text. Now, I always say, can you imagine doing an article as a journalist on hockey or on economics or on any other topic where you don't cite a hockey player or a hockey manager or another expert, or an article on economics without an economist being cited? So silent voices, that is a key finding from the study. People with mental illness, their voice is just simply absent from the media, Canadian media. Second is experts. So who are the experts on psychiatry? Well, we have some of them here today, psychiatrists in the corner there. Don't name and shame them. We have people like Mike and Heather, professors of epidemiology, leading figure in the Mental Health Commission. Ella Amier, who is the executive director of AMI Quebec. There's a great resource for journalists to go to if there's an issue on mental health, to go and talk, to get expert opinion. And again, we found 80-90% of articles never go to an expert. Many of you will know about what we call the recovery paradigm. This is a paradigm which is based on evidence that people with mental illness can recover. And we have people here who are living embodiments of that, so Mike won't mind me singling him out, I hope. That Mike is somebody who's struggled with a mental illness, and he'll be talking about this later. But Mike leads a very productive life. He works, he's married, he has children, he has his house, he lives the same kind of life that I live, that everybody lives. And this is actually more common than people realize, that 30, 50, even 60% of people with mental illness can work, can live in a house, live independently, have a family. So this kind of recovery story, recovery paradigm is absent from most of the Canadian media stories. We found that in only about 20% of stories is recovery a central theme, or even a peripheral theme. And the same with rehabilitation. And there are in that 20%, there are some great examples, and some newspapers do take a better approach than others. And Andre is one of the journalists who has really made some headway in trying to show the other side of mental illness. Another thing we found, we asked the question, are mental health interventions ever discussed? Is mental health treatment discussed? Again, only 20% of cases talk about mental illness treatments and mental health interventions. And this is really quite stunning, because we know that most mental illness can be treated. It can be treated through medication, through psychosocial interventions, CBT, and that people can be stabilized, and people, just as you can with diabetes or asthma or with a physical disability, if you're given the right supports and services, you can live a productive, normal life. And again, this is just never mentioned, hardly mentioned, only in 20% of cases. When we look at the other 80% of the papers, of the newspaper articles that are more stigmatizing and that are more negative, we always read about mental illness in the context of homelessness, crime, prisons, the court system, the police, and sexual assaults. So you'll always see mental illness coupled in a sentence or phrase with those kind of more negative concepts. I wanted to give you a few examples of what we commonly come across. This is an article from, actually I won't say where it's from because it's been video recorded and that could be, get myself in trouble. But this is a typical kind of comment, this is a typical article we read. A French convict who confessed to killing a fellow inmate and said he ripped out the dead man's heart and ate it is a schizophrenic. His request for isolation was ignored. His defense lawyer claims that he has been diagnosed as schizophrenic and had asked prison authorities to separate him from other inmates. Experts had qualified him as schizophrenic and therefore was potentially dangerous. He had problems with other prisoners, blah blah. Anyway, so that's a very stigmatizing story linking schizophrenia with violence, with risk. And many of you might not know this, but actually there's been lots of research studies which show people with mental illness are much more likely to be a victim of crime than actually a perpetrator. So if you think about it, it makes sense. If you have a mental illness, you might be vulnerable. People who are predators can prey on you, can take advantage of any vulnerability. So it's a complete myth that people with schizophrenia or any other mental illness have a tendency to violence or crime. And this is especially the case when you look at things like anxiety and depression, because people with major depression, they have a hard time getting out of bed, let alone going onto the street and committing a violent crime. So that's kind of one example. I have a whole folder here. I could carry on for the whole evening, but it doesn't make a very nice reading. I think one final one here. This is quoting a justice official, and the justice official says, the justice official is asking for more security in a courthouse, saying that the courthouse has had lots of problems and we need security guards. The journalist asks the person why, and he says there are some nasty characters in a courthouse, from hardened criminals to the mentally ill. So again, the journalists will just casually throw in this kind of phrase, mental illness, to try and support an argument of security, danger, risk, without thinking about the data, as I said, which shows that people with mental illness are more likely to be a victim than a perpetrator. And just, I guess my time is up, so I'll just give you one final extract, which we did find lots of good articles and lots of articles which were recovery oriented that gave a bigger picture, and we're very pleased to see that. And I must say, without naming and shaming the actual papers, that some papers and journalists take a much more progressive and positive view of mental illness, and some just see it as a chance to sensationalize and titillate the reader. So here is something from, and I think I can mention the good papers. The leader post-Regina. In brief, many Canadians still view mental illness as something to be ashamed of rather than a medical problem. Would you think it is a sign of personal weakness that someone has diabetes or cancer, or pneumonia or common cold? Of course you wouldn't, yet many people view mental illness as an indicator of personal weakness. Sadly, that includes many suffering from mental illness and their families. This stigma is a major stumbling block for sufferers. So too is the general lack of knowledge about mental illness, including knowing where to turn for help. And it carries on in this kind of positive, and it goes on to cite somebody from the Canadian Mental Health Association, and this is a positive article, and we see some of these. So really, I would just ask you to kind of, you've been given the folders, you have my email, and if you're interested in this research, just stay in touch. Watch this space, that we're doing a much more fine-grained analysis as we speak. We're writing manuscripts which we're going to submit to the Canadian Journal of Psychiatry and other other journals. And really, I just want to start this dialogue, and there's so many people in this room with rich experience in various manners that we hope to stay in touch, and that this is the beginning of some process of collaboration with people here. So thank you very much.